99% of the time, I work the most boring job in the world. But last night, something interesting happened for once, and it's kind of freaking me out. A quick intro to me. I went to a 4-year film school, spent thousands of hours learning how to use some of the most challenging animation and VFX tools on the planet, and went hundreds of thousands of dollars into debt. Also, I could sit in a dark room and push buttons for less than $10 an hour. A good education really pays off, doesn't it? When I graduated at the top of my animation program, with a proficiency in Maya, Avid, the entire Adobe suite, and any other program you can think of, I naively imagined that job offers would be pouring in. At the very least, I thought I would get a response to the hundreds of applications that I filed. But nothing, not a peep. It turns out my impeccable resume and multiple indentured servitude positions, unpaid internships, meant jack shit in the crowded field of post-production. In my first year, I had to subsist on bare-bones freelance gigs, walking dogs, and donating plasma. Glamorous, right? I thought my luck had finally changed a few months ago, when I finally got a call back for a full-time post-production gig. I don't remember ever even applying to the place, but I was desperate and in debt, and I was willing to take anything. That said, it was still a hard job to say yes to. I had always dreamed of editing feature films, and eventually working at a place like Disney or DreamWorks where I could become an animator. And this job was not that. It was an assistant editor position at a tiny company that does one thing: digitizing people's old home movies. People bring in their grandparents' old VHS tapes and film reels, and we turn them into files that they can play on their computer. That's it. My job specifically is not to digitize the movies. No. That sacred duty goes to a greasy middle-aged guy named Ralph who calls me sweetheart, and I'm convinced does coke in the bathroom while his files are rendering. No. My job is to review the files once they're on the computer, and remove any artifacts, and glitches, crackles, static. If there are any imperfections in the file, I remove them using a suite of digital tools. With my training, this work is pretty much just mindless clicking. Theoretically, I could do it at like a Starbucks or my apartment, and finish all the files for a month in one all-nighter. But my boss, Antonio, insists that the files can't be removed from his secure facility. And don't ask me why. This isn't top secret alien autopsy footage. It's kids' birthday parties from the 80s. So, I have to spend 8 hours every day in a cramped editing suite, in a basement office at a strip mall. There's a Chinese takeout place upstairs, and their ventilation must be mixed up with ours, because the place constantly smells like peanut oil, pork, and onions. Oh, and one last thing I forgot to mention. The editing suite, closet, is so tiny that 2 people really can't work in there effectively. Antonio told me this when he hired me, and told me that I might have to work flexible hours. I said I was down for anything, obviously. I could barely afford ramen at the time, but in hindsight, that might have been a mistake. Because by flexible hours, Antonio meant that Ralph would come in the mornings to digitize the files, and I would come in from 6 in the evening until 2 in the morning to clean them up. He said it was ideal for someone who wants a side hustle during the daytime, which his boss speak for, and don't expect me to pay you enough to live on. So I still have to walk dogs to make ends meet, and the result is I get an average of 3 hours of sleep a night, if I'm lucky. Okay, I think I've given you enough to envision the scene. Me, alone in a dark room just big enough to stand up in, chugging Red Bull, my face lit by the glow of grainy home videos on the screen in front of me. Got it? Good. It had been a particularly rough night, maybe my worst yet, though I kinda say that about every night. I hadn't been able to make time for any actual dinner, so I was munching on Pop-Tarts during rendering breaks. One video had been especially frustrating me, I had spent the whole previous night getting it just right, but Antonio had insisted I needed to do more to remove some file corruptions that nobody was ever going to notice. So I was grumpy, malnourished, and exhausted. It was a little after midnight, and I figured I would fix one more file and call it a night. I picked one that I thought would be easy, a birthday party video that was under 10 minutes, and I loaded it onto the computer. I didn't notice anything funny about the video at first. Hell, at this point, I barely register what the videos are. I just numbly look for problems to fix. It could be some bad stuff for all I know. This one wasn't though. It was just some little kids running around in a backyard. Green grass, blue sky, white picket fence. And there were some balloons tied to chairs and a piñata hanging from a tree. The sort of thing that I had seen a million times at that point. Whoever was holding the camera was shaking pretty bad. So I was mostly just stabilizing the framing as much as I could, fixing a few scratches here and there. Simple fixes really. That is until about 5 minutes into the film. Right at the 5-minute mark, there is a serious glitch in the far background of the shot. A hazy black shape flickered on the screen. It was just for a few seconds, barely noticeable to the layperson, but I knew that Antonio would see if I left it in. So I backed up to the start of the glitch, pulled a few fancy tricks, and I blended it into the background. Voila. I hoped that would be the last time that I had to do any serious edits, but I was wrong. Mere seconds after I removed the first glitch, it happened again. Only this time, it wasn't so far in the background, but closer to the fence. I worked my magic again and warily moved on. Was I gonna have to do this for every frame of the film? I did a quick scroll through the rest of the timeline and saw to my relief that it didn't appear to pop up again. I returned to where I had left off, content that I would only need to stabilize the footage and then I could go home. But there it was again. I swore. Somehow, even though I had just checked the footage, the same black shape showed up just a few frames later. This time, it was directly in front of the fence, and this time, it wasn't quite so hazy. It looked almost like a person. I frowned and I zoomed in for a closer look. I was right. Although it had initially looked like pure noise, I could now see the dim outlines of a small human figure. It looked like a child. I wasn't exactly sure how that happened, but the digitization process can do weird things. Most likely, it had duplicated one of the other kids in the yard from another part of the video. I erased the image once again, but it was getting more difficult. It took me several minutes to render my edits, and I had a sinking feeling that it was only going to get harder. Like clockwork, the shape kept showing up every few frames. It was incredibly tedious. Play a frame, edit out the shape, rinse, repeat. I checked my watch again. It was almost 1 and I wasn't even halfway through the video yet. Each edit I had to make was taking a little bit longer too. I was going to be here all night if I didn't want Antonio to yell at me. I started to notice a little after 1 how much clearer the glitch had become. It was now very obviously a child, a young boy to be exact. His skin was so pale and his hair and clothes so dark that he could have been from a black and white film. The rest of the video was in color though. It was the damnedest thing, like he had come from a totally different film. Was it possible that some other file had corrupted this one? I had no knowledge of that sort of thing ever happening before, but the difference was just so stark. The happy, laughing children in the foreground, and the lonesome, silent boy standing by the fence watching them play. The more I pored over the video, frame by frame, second by second, the more eerie the boy's stare became, because he was very clearly watching the other children. His eyes followed them around the yard, even if he himself did not move. No, he stayed quite still, his hands in his jacket pockets, his billowy trousers falling over his shiny black shoes. He was dressed more for a funeral than for a birthday party. The clothes were several sizes too large also, and the hair, so neatly combed, so rigid and straight. If I didn't see his eyes moving, I would have thought that he was some sort of mannequin or a doll, or maybe a corpse. It was now a few minutes after 2, and I was finally on the last couple seconds of the film. The boy was in every other frame at this point, flickering spookily in and out of existence. I didn't have time to be creeped out though. I needed to get home ASAP if I wanted to get any sleep that night. I finished editing the boy out of the final frame of the film, and I gave a little cheer. It was my most rewarding moment at work in months. A sad little reality that I chose not to dwell on. I scrolled back to the beginning of the file to watch it one more time, but I was already starting to pack up my stuff. I pressed play and my jaw hit the floor. I blinked a couple of times, convinced my eyes were tricking me, but they weren't. There was no doubt about it. I was watching the exact same film that I had just been analyzing for over 2 hours, but everything was different. Everything was horribly, horribly wrong. All of the children were gone. The laughing, playing kids, chasing one another, playing tag, shrieking and hollering. They had all vanished. Instead, I looked on an empty backyard. The piñata and the balloons still blew in the afternoon breeze. The shadows of overhead trees still played on the white fence, but the children were gone. In their place was just a palpable absence and the ominous silence of their vanished existence. I scrolled back and forth through the video, searching frantically for some evidence of what I knew for a fact I had just watched, but there was nothing. Where once there had been a joyful party, there was now a void. I looked through my edit history, wondering if I had somehow done something wrong, but there was nothing. Even if I had tried, I could never erase all of the children so seamlessly. The ground they had walked on wasn't even trampled. It was like they had never been there at all. After a few more scrolls through the file, I realized that I was wrong. It wasn't completely empty. No, in the same spots that I had already edited, the spots that I had spent 2 hours meticulously cleaning, there he was again. The boy with the pale face and the black suit, staring straight ahead. This time, not at the other children, for there weren't any, but at me. I shivered and instinctively closed the file. These late hours were starting to get to me. I considered my options. At the very least, I could delete the file. I would tell Ralph it was hopelessly corrupted and he needed to convert it again. He'd give me shit for it, but what else was I supposed to do? I couldn't tell him the truth. He would never believe me. Or else he would snort and tell me smugly that women just don't understand technology. Thinking about that got my blood boiling. Screw that, I thought to myself. I know how to convert a freaking VHS tape. I could just do Ralph's job for him and do it right. There wouldn't be any corruptions if I converted the file, I said to myself confidently. I closed out of the editing software, swiveled around my chair, and began to sort through the piles of tapes and rolls of film that took up over half the room. Ralph was a slob, but I eventually found the tape with the right label. I plugged it into a VCR, and a monitor above me crackled to life. First, there is a solid wall of static. Slowly, it cleared up and the video came into focus, doubling and tripling itself around the screen before it finally collapsed into a single feed. But what emerged on the screen was not a child's birthday party. It was still an outdoor scene, but the manicured suburban lawn was replaced with a desolate, rocky beach. Angry gray water churned into the distance. The sky was the color of stained paper. Above the rush of the sea, I heard a mangled cawing, like a dying seagull. I rolled my eyes. Had I grabbed the wrong tape? I checked the label again, but it matched exactly with the file name on the computer. The time code in the corner of the video was the same too. I looked at a few of the other tapes lying out, but none of them had ever been opened. This was the only possible source of the file that I just edited. But it was impossible that this was the same video. It just couldn't be. I kicked the computer in frustration. I swore at it and at the video and at Antonio and at the entire crappy situation. A whole night of work wasted, and I had no idea how to even explain what had happened. On the screen, something was happening that I had not yet noticed. I was too busy wallowing in self-pity and cursing my own miserable life to watch carefully. That was a mistake. I should have paid closer attention to the water, the sky, the sand. If I had, maybe I would have noticed more quickly what was coming. Maybe I would have smashed the VCR, or yanked a plug out of the wall, and I wouldn't be writing this right now. I wouldn't be huddled in my bedroom as I type these words, trying not to make a sound, telling myself over and over again that the scratching I hear in my window is just a tree branch, that the whispers keeping me from sleep are a figment of my overtired imagination. But I didn't watch closely enough, and I didn't act fast enough. I didn't see how, as the tide came in, the waves left an odd, dark stain on the seashore. A stain that crept up the rocks as if it had a life of its own. I didn't see how the storm clouds in the sky moved too quickly, moved in ways clouds aren't supposed to. And I didn't notice the shadowy figures with no faces advancing from the back of the frame, walking on the top of the water like they were made out of smoke. When I did finally notice, when I looked up at the screen and saw one of the figures walking straight towards the camera, and this one did have a face. Oh yes, he did. Well, by the time that I noticed that, it was too late. I watched, paralyzed, unblinking, as his pale face and rigidly combed black hair filled up the entire screen, and his milky white eyes stared into my own. And then he smiled, his mouth wide open like he wanted to swallow the whole world. I've never seen anything so totally, hellishly empty as that endless black throat. The screen went black, and then it glowed white, and then it turned to static, and the film was over. And at that exact moment, my stomach burst into agony. I doubled over. I think I even screamed. I had never felt anything like this before. Like white-hot waves of pain radiating from my gut all the way up to my chest. Each wave grew in intensity, like I was being stabbed over and over. I couldn't think, I could barely even move. I collapsed off my chair and I lay on the ground, retching. My mouth filled up with the sour taste of bile, and I knew I was going to be sick. I was going to puke my freaking brains out. I managed to crawl over to a trash can just in time, and would you believe I managed to get over half of the vomit inside of it? I was hopeless to expect more than that. Vomit jetted out of me like a hose, and it just kept coming and coming. It was no relief to the pain in my stomach though. The pain remained strong even as I overfilled the trash can with vomit. Who knew you could throw up so much from just a couple Pop-Tarts and a Red Bull? At last, after I disposed of seemingly all of my internal organs, the vomiting stopped. The pain was dying down too. I leaned back against the computer, breathing deeply. My vision was swimming. My head was pounding. The room smelled like something had died in it, and I had a feeling that if I didn't get out soon, the stench would make me throw up all over again. I got to my feet, legs shaking, and I began to walk towards the door. Right as I put my hands on the doorknob, I looked back at the pile of vomit that I had left on the floor. My eyes widened. Something in the puke was moving. I steadied myself against the door, feeling like I might faint. From within the vomit, something long and black crawled out, like an enormous spider's leg. Had that been inside of me? It was at this point, after withstanding far more than anyone else could be expected to, that I finally passed out. Or I assumed that's what happened. Because the next thing I knew, I was being jostled awake by a familiar greasy hand. "Hey sweetheart, wake up." I opened my eyes and in my hazy morning vision, I could make out two faces. Ralph, smiling cruelly, and Antonio happy mad. Antonio yelled at me for almost an hour. "I'm not running a hotel," he screamed. "Get your things and get out of here." A lot of stuff like that. To be honest, I could care less. It didn't even register that he was firing me. No, all I cared about was the fact that there was no vomit on the floor, and the VHS tape from the previous night was nowhere to be seen. Both had vanished. If it weren't for a small vomit stain on my shoes, I would have thought that I had dreamed up the entire thing. But the shoes were definitely stained. And as I walked away from the editing suite, dimly recollecting that I had nothing to eat and no money, and that was the one detail that really stayed with me. And it's still with me now. Everything from last night did happen. I know that it did. So why was there no evidence? What happened to my vomit? What happened to the tape? And how is it all connected to the scratching on my window that started at sundown? And the whispering voices that won't let me sleep? Since I started writing this, my stomach has been hurting like hell again. But I can't leave the building to go to the hospital. I'm too scared to do that. Because there's a playground just a block away from my house and I have to pass it to get anywhere in the city. I passed it just this morning as I walked home from getting fired. I didn't linger or pay too much attention. Why should I? It was full of laughing, playing children like it always is. Like it's supposed to be. During the day, it's normal for children to be at the playground. All kinds of children. Even quiet little boys with blank white faces and dark hair. It's not unusual to see a boy like that at a playground during the day, standing by a chain link fence, watching everyone who passes by. Not just me. Not just me. To see him at night though, when all the other children have gone home. Now that would not be normal. That would be a little unusual. I don't think I could explain that. But then again, I think, as the pain grows to unbearable new levels, what would be worse? To see him standing by the fence, or to not see him there? Because if he isn't there, he might be anywhere at all. The bile rises in my throat, and I know that soon I will puke again. As I crawl towards the trash can, I repeat to myself over and over again that the crawling sensation inside my stomach is just the vomit and nothing else.